But here, Keener's going to address Hume and the philosophy of science. So he goes on to say that despite the roles of Spinoza and others, the most influential voice contributing to the long-standing modern prejudice against miracles was undoubtedly 18th century philosopher David Hume. So he lived between 1711 and 1776. And his argument did not, however, achieve his canonical, tongue-in-cheek there, role immediately. Hume's philosophic work generated far less interest in his day than it has posthumously. Even his specific work on miracles was not considered very original, being influenced by Spinoza, Diaz, and others. So saying this is a little bit of ad hominem, a little bit, but at the same time, we're just talking about the philosophy of science, and of course, history is important there. And so, we wouldn't want to take attribution from bad guys in history, even if they've made somewhat okay points. And so we're just kind of taking a look at what in the history of both leading up to Hume and then Hume himself, and then what impact did his work have. And so we want to know, well, okay, if it wasn't seen too positively at the time or after his death, but only much, much later, what was the case that caused that to happen? So Keener's going to do a pretty good job of laying down that foundation here.
Yeah. I think part of it was Hume's style. He was a really good writer, and so he could make his points really well. In fact, Keener points that out. He says, although his style was much superior to that of his predecessors, Hume often recycled old arguments of earlier deists without modifying them to anticipate the many critiques that had already been leveled against them by their opponents. So he kind of reshuffled these various arguments, but he did it in his own style and in a way that was very persuasive. He tells us, nevertheless, partly as a result of his fame in other areas, Hume is generally regarded today as the starting point for modern discussion of miracles. So we'll start with Hume and move on from there, right? And of course, Hume criticized our ability to know that a particular account of a miracle was true. Keener tells us that Enlightenment thinkers did not all follow Hume. In fact, and his Enlightenment predecessors found nothing in empiricism, right? That's the idea that we know by sense perception. The source of our knowledge is our sense perceptions. So nothing in empiricism that entailed his conclusion. In contrast to Hume, for instance, his predecessor, John Locke, who was the founder of 18th century empiricism, affirmed, notice, the possibility of God-wrought miracles and viewed them as compatible with reason. So Locke held to miracles, and he was an empiricist, right? Just as Hume was an empiricist. So just by virtue of being an empiricist doesn't mean that you had to jettison a belief in miracles. Locke certainly had a belief in miracles.
I like that, John Locke. I wonder if he did anything else in history.
Yeah.
Well, it was a reaction against the increased Christian apologetic from miracles rather than a natural development from scientific empiricism that led to a counteroffensive against miracle claims. In fact, the movement of apologetic theory that Hume opposed was closely tied with the very movement that spawned England's scientific revolution. So, skepticism arose not from empirical data or science per se, but from particular philosophers. And I'm pretty sure that sticks a craw in David Hume's, at least his known mouth at the time. So I'm sure he didn't appreciate that too much, but we can only assume there. Well, empiricism itself is neutral regarding God's existence and activity. Well, I wouldn't say probably neutral, but it doesn't say one way or the other there. So neutral in that way. And had been used by those who supported traditional beliefs in miracles as well as by those who opposed it.